Blade Runner 2049 is the long-awaited sequel from the original Blade Runner that came out in the 80s, and this movie is a return to this universe. We had a movie back in the 80s that was kind of polarizing. It was very different. It was Ridley Scott, the visionary filmmaker behind Alien and Prometheus and all kinds of films. It was a Ridley Scott original film. He created this universe and it was one movie. And it was very strange, very bizarre, very deep, very slow. And it ended up having 3 different cuts, and finally, after all this time, we finally get to see a sequel to this film. It's been so long since the first one finally came out. This sequel has been so long awaited, and it stars Ryan Gosling, Harrison Ford, and it is directed by Denis Villeneuve. In this movie, there's literally nothing that they tell you in the trailers. It's just like, Ryan Gosling, Harrison Ford are in a movie together, and it's Blade Runner. That's like all you know from the trailers. So I'm gonna tell you basically nothing. While being vague, I can say Ryan Gosling plays the new Blade Runner 30 years after the first film, after Rick Deckard retired a long time ago. This movie surrounds around this detective story that he has to go on, and eventually that leads him to finding Rick Deckard. That's all I'm gonna tell you. So guys, I was so excited for Blade Runner 2049. This was one of my most anticipated films of the year. After having seen the first Blade Runner, this movie I was so excited for, because the thing is, Blade Runner is a really fantastic movie. That is one of Ridley Scott's best. It's a really, really fascinating sci-fi epic. Everything about that movie, it was so thought-provoking and so well done, and it was really artsy, and it was a very noir-ish type movie, and I love noirs. It didn't feel like your typical sci-fi movie. It felt like a noir in sci-fi setting, and it was a very deep, artsy-like movie. And for the record, I've only seen the final cut. I haven't seen the other 2 cuts. That's the cut that I was told I should see. That is the cut that I've heard is the definitive cut, and I haven't seen the other 2. Even though that movie was so incredible, and it was so intriguing in every way, like the universe was so cool, the characters that they built up were so fascinating, I don't think it's a flawless movie. I think there's a very forced romance in there, which is kind of one of the focal points of the movie. The romance between Rick Deckard and Rachel should have been fleshed out way more, because it was kind of a big part of the movie. But everything else in that movie, besides that rushed romance, I think everything was perfect, pretty much. It's a movie that keeps you thinking long after you see it. And it is such an incredible film. Before I even saw Blade Runner, I was always like, why is that a singular film? How come they never made any sequels to it? And they finally have made a sequel now. And it is a completely new story, which is something I loved about Blade Runner 2049. This movie wasn't like a movie that was supposed to be like revitalizing the franchise and setting up 10 other Blade Runner movies. This is just a movie that stands on its own. It feels like you could watch this movie and not have to see the original to understand what's happening in this movie. I would recommend you do see the original because it's pretty groundbreaking and pretty awesome, but this movie, you don't really need to see the original to see this film. This movie is freaking unbelievable. Everything about this movie is so good. It is one of the best sci-fi movies I've ever seen in my life. It is one of the best movies of the decade. Everything about Blade Runner 2049 was close to perfection as you can possibly get. There are going to be young people, like me when I saw Lord of the Rings when I was like in middle school or 5th grade or something like that, when I first saw that movie. There are going to be people that see this movie when they're young, and it is going to inspire them to make films. It's going to inspire them to want to join the film art industry, like whether it be writing or directing or just filmmaking in general. This movie is gonna inspire people to make films. Everything about this movie, everything, it's flawless. Ryan Gosling in this movie gives an Oscar-worthy performance. And I loved him in La La Land, but he might be even better here. I've gotta be honest. Ryan Gosling in this movie was so subtle. He was so intriguing throughout this entire movie. Even though Rick Deckard was a big thing that was shown in the marketing, he's on the posters, he's front and center on a lot of the marketing stuff, he's not the focal point of this movie. He's very integral to the plot, yes. Rick Deckard is, of course, a very big thing in this movie. But this is Ryan Gosling's film. This is Ryan Gosling's noir film. And he was magnificent in this film. But he also had so many moments where he had to pull off emotion, And just by giving a facial expression, he didn't have to like say what he was feeling, he just had to give a facial expression. And your heart would break looking at this guy's face that's going through so much pain. Your heart would literally break in half several times through this movie just by looking at Ryan Gosling's poor face. He's so good at that, just telling emotions in his face without having to actually like say what he's feeling. He's so good at that. In this movie, he uses that so much, and I love this character. Kay, the character Ryan Gosling plays, I love him. This guy is so worthy of being the new Blade Runner and the new main character of this film. And obviously Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard is the thing people really wanted to see, and he doesn't disappoint either. He's not in the movie as much as I thought he would be, actually. He's actually in it a little bit sparingly. But while he is there, while he has stuff to do in this movie, it is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, it is thought-provoking as heck. This is one of his best performances, I think, ever. Which is saying a lot, because Harrison Ford is one of the best actors of all time. I think this is one of my favorite performances I've seen from this guy. He has so many incredible scenes in this film, and he's got such a touching arc. He has such an incredible arc in this film, and I'm so glad we finally got to revisit the character of Rick Deckard. Because you always know Harrison Ford for Han Solo and Indiana Jones, but the other third trifecta of the incredible Harrison Ford characters, these three characters are iconic, and I love them, even though Rick Deckard isn't quite as well known as Indiana Jones or Han Solo, but he's incredible. Every shot in this movie feels like it could belong on the One Perfect Shot Twitter. Like, the One Perfect Shots Twitter, when this movie comes out on Blu-ray, are gonna go crazy. The cinematography for this movie is one of the best I've seen, I think, ever. Roger Deakins, one of the greatest cinematographers, shot this movie, and I was blown away by every shot of this film. Every shot of this film has something interesting going on. It's crazy. It is insane. The visuals are mind-blowing. They were really good in the 80s movie. Like, for an 80s movie to have visuals that good are like, it was insane back in the day. But these visuals, now that we're in a modern time, they can really show you what this universe could look like. How incredible this universe could look. And it is insane. It looks so beautiful. It is one of the most visually stunning movies I've ever seen. This is like what George Lucas wanted to do with the prequels, but epically failed to do because CGI wasn't good yet.
Movie, I love you.
You almost got us killed. Are you brainless?
I speak.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Now get out of here.
No, Mrs. Stay. Mr. Kochata and Pinks.
This movie literally feels like as if they made A New Hope, like Star Wars A New Hope back in the 70s, and then for whatever reason they waited 30 years to make another film, and Empire Strikes Back came out 30 years later. This is what that feels like. This movie is the Empire Strikes Back to the original Blade Runner. And that is a thing that's said often about movies. It's like, oh, Dark Knight is the Empire Strikes Back to Batman Begins. Oh, this is the Empire Strikes Back to that. When it's referring to a sequel that's better than the original. But this movie, it is totally like Empire Strikes Back, because the thing that Empire Strikes Back did was build the world more. It gave our characters more things to deal with now that you know them and care about them from the first movie. They give the characters more complex things. They build the universe even more, and this universe is one of the coolest universes I've seen in a movie, and there's only been 2 movies about it. It is the most incredible universe. This movie is darker than the first one. This movie is more complex than the first one. Everything about this movie, even though the first one is really good, everything in this movie improves on it. I'm serious. Blade Runner did have some action and it was very good. But Blade Runner 2049 is an hour longer than the first movie. This movie is like Lord of the Rings length, and it feels like an epic. It never felt like it was going too slow. It felt like I never wanted it to end, really. I was like, oh my gosh. It's been 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I'm enjoying every frame on the screen. But back to what I was saying about the action. The action in this movie is unbelievable. I loved the action in the first movie, but the action in this movie once again improves on it. There is a scene involving flashing lights between 2 characters that have to fight, and it is incredible. There's a climax involving water which was so tension-filled. This movie is so tension-filled. Like, I was gripping my seat, dying while watching this movie. The action, the tension is all there, especially in the climax, but there is, mostly in the first half of this movie, it's more of a detective story. It's more of a slow burn detective story like the first Blade Runner was, and I found it all enthrallingly, brilliantly interesting. I found all of it so intriguing. I was amazed by how intriguing I was with this little mystery that Ryan Gosling has to solve. It was... I'm coming so close to spoiling things about this movie that I don't want to spoil, but it's because, like, I'm dying to talk about this movie. There's so many things to dissect. And in the original Blade Runner, one of the things it's most famous for is for leaving things open-ended, leaving questions that are gonna burn in your brain after you see the first film. And this movie also stays with that theme. This movie has so many burning questions that are leaving you after the movie ends, and it's also not like a movie that retreads the first one. This movie has a very different story. It has very different ideas and ideologies and themes. It's not really a reboot of the first movie. This is more like its own thing that Denis Villeneuve, as a massive fan of Blade Runner, wanted to make. Denis Villeneuve even mentioned that making this project, making a sequel to Blade Runner, was going to be one of the most intimidating things he's ever done in his life. And he mentioned that. Ryan Gosling mentioned it too. They talked about how intimidating it was making this movie. They thought they wouldn't even be able to do it. But this movie, everything is perfect. It's so emotional. It's so heartbreaking at times. The tension is perfect. Everything in this movie is riveting. The cinematography is immaculate. Everything in this movie is perfect. And it's one of the best sci-fi movies ever made. Everything. This movie is everything. I am absolutely going to give Blade Runner 2049 an A+. The more I think about this movie, the more I think I might possibly like it more than Baby Driver. I'm serious. This movie, everything about it is incredible and I love it. And I want to see it again right now. I want to see it like so many times, over and over again, on repeat. Just watching this film and just seeing how glorious it is and being transported to this incredible universe. So guys, if you like my review of Blade Runner 2049, be sure to like this video, be sure to subscribe, be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and go see this movie. Please support this movie. It is unbelievable. Okay guys, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. So set 'em up, Joe. I got a little story